It was supposed to be a quiet, private gathering. Yet, in the middle of a glittering royal corridor, Princess Anne stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. Catherine's breath caught. The chatter that had moments ago filled the air dissolved into an uneasy silence, as though the palace itself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Courtiers stiffened, eyes darting between the two women. A soft gasp rippled through the gathered company when Anne's fingers, steady and deliberate, undid the clasp. The box opened slowly, almost ceremonially, revealing a crown of diamonds and history, the one object capable of igniting both awe and tension in equal measure. Under the soft golden glow of the chandeliers, its shimmer was unmistakable. Princess Diana's most treasured tiara, the piece that had graced her during some of the most photographed and scrutinized moments of her life. Its arcs of platinum and brilliant stones seemed to catch every breath in the room, each facet carrying whispers from the past. Those who knew the true significance of this jewel could feel the air thicken. It was more than a royal adornment. It was an unspoken statement, a thread connecting Diana's turbulent journey to the present moment. Anne's gaze never wavered as she extended the box toward Catherine. It was a look of both solemn duty and quiet resolve, one that seemed to say, "This is not merely a gift, this is a charge." Catherine's eyes shimmered, tears threatening to spill even before she reached for it. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the tiara, as though afraid that touching it might summon every memory and ghost that came with it. Her composure, so often her shield in public, faltered. Those watching could see the tremor in her breath, the glisten of emotion breaking through the practiced royal smile. In the periphery, a discreet camera flash from one of the palace's authorized photographers captured the moment. That single image, though yet unseen by the public, would one day be recognized as a turning point. The act was quiet, but its implications roared. Why now? Why here? And above all, why was it Princess Anne, known for her pragmatism and guarded emotions, who had chosen to deliver this most intimate of legacies? Every person present felt the undercurrent of something deeper. This was not part of any official ceremony. No formal announcement had preceded it. There had been no press briefings, no scheduled inclusion on the royal calendar. It was unexpected, unscripted, and therefore profoundly dangerous. In the intricate web of royal protocol, such moments are rarely accidental. The murmurs began before Catherine could even close the box. A few exchanged glances in silent recognition of the fact that this act, seemingly simple, would ripple through the corridors of power. What had been handed over was not just metal and gemstones, but influence, legacy, and the echoes of a woman who still, decades after her passing, held sway over the public's heart. Anne, ever composed, did not elaborate. She simply gave the faintest nod, an unspoken confirmation that what had just occurred was meant, deliberate, and irreversible. And as Catherine finally clutched the box to her chest, a tear escaped, rolling slowly down her cheek, a visible testament to the storm building beneath her calm surface. But what made Princess Anne choose this moment and this tiara for Catherine? The answer reaches back decades, into the most fiercely guarded secrets of Diana's royal legacy. Before it became the centerpiece of Catherine's emotional collapse, Diana's tiara had its own story. A story steeped in beauty, defiance, and the unspoken war between tradition and individuality. The first time the public saw it, it was not just a sparkling crown atop a young princess's head, it was a statement. Diana had stepped into the royal spotlight, radiant and unafraid, and the tiara became an extension of her very presence. It captured the flash of camera bulbs, the collective sigh of adoration, and the silent tension of those who understood that such a jewel was never meant to be wielded so freely. In the rigid world of royal appearances, every jewel was political, every choice of attire deliberate. Yet, from that first evening, Diana made the tiara her own. She wore it not just at banquets or state receptions, but at moments where her smile hid deeper turmoil. The Queen, seasoned in the language of subtle protocol, reportedly expressed reservations. Such a powerful symbol, worn so often, risked drawing focus away from the institution and onto the individual, a shift Diana seemed either unaware of or unwilling to resist. But Diana, with her natural charm and quiet steel, refused to treat the tiara as a prop for tradition alone. To her, it was a shield, a piece of armor she could carry into the most daunting royal duties, a reminder that beneath the rules and rehearsed gestures, she was still her own person. Behind closed doors, Whispers grew. Courtiers noted how often she reached for it, as if it were a talisman against the loneliness that came with her role. In moments of strained marriages, hostile stares, suffocating scrutiny, the tiara seemed to fortify her. She reportedly referred to it in private as her armor, a small rebellion wrapped in diamonds. It was a subtle defiance, almost impossible to challenge directly, yet it resonated in a way no speech could. Every public appearance with it carried an unspoken message. She could be luminous without being controlled. Then, after Diana's death, the tiara vanished. No quiet loan to a museum, no official announcement of its placement, just gone. Swallowed into the labyrinth of Windsor's private vaults. It became a ghost in the royal jewelry collection, spoken of only in hushed tones, its absence as telling as its presence had once been. Some claimed the tiara's history made it too dangerous to reappear, that its association with Diana would reignite comparisons and old wounds. Others suggested it had been deliberately kept hidden, sealed away, to prevent it from being used to overshadow the current image of the monarchy. And so, for years, it lay in silence, locked behind heavy doors, removed from the public eye, but never from the public memory. Every so often, its whereabouts would surface in whispers. Staff members swore it had been spotted in the deeper vaults of Windsor, wrapped in silk, untouched since the night Diana last wore it. To those who knew its story, it was more than a relic. It was a dormant weapon, one that could be used to stir the heart of a nation, or fracture the palace from within. If the tiara had been hidden for so long, why was it suddenly emerging now, and why in Anne's hands rather than Charles's? For years, Princess Anne stood at the edges of royal spectacle, neither seeking the spotlight nor surrendering her influence. She had long mastered the art of quiet power, wielding it without theatrics, without grand speeches, and without the need to be at the center of every photograph. To the public, she was the no-nonsense royal, respected for her work ethic and immunity to scandal. But those who truly understood the inner workings of the palace knew that Anne's strength lay in the shadows, where she guarded certain treasures and certain truths. Long before the world began speculating over Catherine and the tiara, Anne had shared private, unrecorded conversations with Diana, conversations that no biographer or courtier could ever fully capture. They were not women prone to sentimentality, yet there was an unspoken understanding between them. Both had walked the tightrope of royal duty. Both had endured the suffocating pressure of public expectation, and both had learned how quickly the crown could turn from honor to burden. In these rare moments of candor, Diana entrusted Anne with more than just words. She entrusted her with intent. Reports whispered through the corridors that Diana had made Anne promise never in writing, never in an official statement, but in the only way she trusted, that certain personal effects would be kept safe from political maneuvering. These were not simply heirlooms. They were fragments of her identity, the pieces that told her story in a language more truthful than the headlines ever could. Among them was the tiara, a jewel that had become synonymous with Diana's grace and quiet defiance. When Diana's life was cut short, chaos rippled through the monarchy. Estates were settled, belongings divided, and the process of deciding where each artifact would go became a delicate and often ruthless negotiation. Somewhere in this storm, without public acknowledgement or ceremony, the tiara came into Anne's possession. It was not part of any official will or decree, but those closest to the matter claimed there was no mistake. The transfer was deliberate, discreet, and rooted in that final unspoken agreement between the two women. For Anne, this was not a bauble to be paraded on state occasions or loaned for diplomatic effect. It was a trust, and she treated it as such. Through the years, it remained locked away, far from the reach of political optics or the temptation to use it as a symbol for causes Diana herself might never have supported. Anne knew the tiara's reappearance would carry implications far greater than beauty. It could shift alliances, ignite rivalries, and awaken the ghost of a princess who still loomed larger than any living royal. But time is relentless, even for those who guard secrets. As the years passed, Anne began to feel the weight of her promise press more heavily upon her. She was not eternal, and neither was the opportunity to give the tiara to someone who might truly understand its legacy. The moment would have to come sooner rather than later, and when it did, it would have to be precise, deliberate, and impossible to undo. Yet even Anne could not have predicted that handing the tiara to Catherine would set off a chain of whispers, rivalries, and emotional fractures across the monarchy. To the public, Catherine was the embodiment of composure, the poised, unshakable future queen, who could glide through the most unforgiving scrutiny with a serene smile. Yet, away from the camera flashes and choreographed royal appearances, she carried a private weight that few could comprehend. From the moment she stepped into the role of Princess of Wales, the comparisons began mercilessly, constantly, and impossible to escape. Every glance, every outfit, every gesture was measured against the lingering memory of Diana. The press didn't simply recall Diana. They invoked her like a standard by which Catherine's worth would forever be judged. The burden of those comparisons was not rooted in vanity, but in something far more profound. Diana had not merely been loved, she had been adored, mythologized, and claimed by the public as their own. Catherine understood that inheriting Diana's place in the public's heart was not just an honor, it was a near impossible challenge. Every hospital visit, every charitable initiative, every carefully chosen word was weighed against the humanitarian legacy that Diana had built with her natural warmth and disarming authenticity. Catherine could excel in her duties and still find herself falling short in the court of public opinion, not because of her failures, but because the shadow she stood in was cast by a figure immortalized in perfection. Late at night, when the corridors of Kensington Palace were quiet, she would confide in William. In those moments, her carefully guarded confidence would give way to vulnerability. She would whisper fears of not being enough. Not enough for the role, not enough for the people, not enough to bridge the chasm between Diana's memory and her own reality. William, ever supportive, would remind her that she was building her own legacy. But Catherine knew that legacies in the royal family were not simply built. They were inherited, measured, and sometimes suffocated by history. When Anne placed the velvet box in her hands, the weight of the tiara was not just physical, it was symbolic, almost crushing. It was the crown of a woman whose life had been as luminous as it was tragic. Accepting it felt like accepting a role she had not chosen but could never escape. The diamonds sparkled as though alive, each one reflecting not just light, but the expectations of a nation, the whispers of the past, and the unrelenting gaze of the monarchy's inner circle. Her tears in that moment were complex. Yes, there was honor and acknowledgement that Anne's gesture was deeply personal and unprecedented. But there was also fear, the kind that coils deep in the stomach when one knows that a single moment will change everything. Wearing that tiara would not be a simple nod to the past. It would be a declaration. It would invite comparisons sharper than ever before, reignite dormant rivalries, and perhaps shift the balance of influence within the palace walls. But if Catherine's emotions ran deep, the reactions elsewhere in the palace were far colder and far more calculating. Not everyone was smiling when the tiara was placed in Catherine's hands. What to some appeared as a touching, almost ceremonial act was, to others, an unmistakable warning shot. In certain royal quarters, the gesture was not seen as a blessing, but as a direct challenge to an unsettling shift in the delicate hierarchy that governs the palace. At the center of the unease stood Queen Camilla, her carefully composed expression betrayed only by the faint tightening of her jaw, the kind of controlled reaction that spoke volumes to those who knew how to read it. To the untrained eye, she was impassive. To the court, she was displeased. The whispers began almost immediately, rippling quietly among senior courtiers. Words like overstepping and premature were murmured in corridors where voices rarely rose above the sound of polished shoes on marble floors. The narrative forming behind closed doors was as sharp as it was dangerous. Anne had acted without consultation, without clearing her intentions through the established channels of authority. In a family where the smallest breach of protocol could spark months of private tension, this was not a small breach. It was, in the eyes of some, a deliberate bypassing of Charles's role as both monarch and ultimate arbiter of the royal legacy. The fear was not rooted solely in process, but in symbolism. To grant Catherine Diana's tiara in such a public, unanticipated way was to elevate her in the eyes of the people, perhaps even above others who had spent years carving out their place in the royal order. It positioned her, whether intentionally or not, as the rightful carrier of Diana's torch, the living embodiment of her memory, and the clear face of the monarchy's future. That kind of imagery could not be undone by press releases or polite denials. It would take root in the public's mind and grow, season after season, event after event. Speculation grew bolder behind the scenes. Was this Anne's way of signaling her allegiance in the quiet, ongoing tug-of-war between the modernizing faction of the royal family and the staunch traditionalists? Was she intentionally placing Catherine on a path that bypassed Camilla's influence altogether? And perhaps most dangerously, was she using Diana's memory as a tool to reshape the narrative of succession in a way that even Charles might hesitate to counter? These were not the kinds of questions anyone dared voice openly. In the monarchy, open confrontation is rare. The battle is fought through glances, scheduling changes, and the strategic absence or presence of certain figures at public events. Every smile hides an agenda, and every silence speaks. In the days that followed, certain engagements shifted quietly. Invitations were lost or postponed. Seating arrangements at upcoming functions were subtly adjusted, always with plausible explanations, never with an admission of motive. The message was clear. Anne's move had been felt, and the reaction would not be forgotten. It was becoming increasingly obvious to those paying attention that this was no mere transfer of a family heirloom. It was a declaration, delivered without words, but rich with intent. And while the palace maintained its calm exterior for the world to see, the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable to those within its walls. Lines had been drawn. Alliances were being reconsidered. The tiara was no longer just a symbol of the past, it was now a marker in the quiet war for the monarchy's future. And yet, if palace politics were sharp, the real battle was unfolding far from the cameras in a private confrontation no one outside the royal walls was meant to see. Hours after the tiara exchange, when the palace's official events had wound down and the corridors had emptied of guests, an unmarked door inside Windsor closed with a quiet but deliberate click. Inside that room sat only three figures: Catherine, Anne, and Camilla. And the weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the air. No aides, no courtiers, no press. Just the raw, unvarnished truth waiting to be unleashed. Anne sat forward first, her tone steady, but edged with the authority of someone who had nothing to prove. She made it clear. She had every right to decide who would inherit Diana's personal heirlooms. This wasn't a matter of protocol or permission. It was about honoring a promise made long before some in the room had even held a place in the family. Camilla, however, was not one to let such a statement pass unchallenged. Her voice, calm at first, sharpened with each syllable as she accused Anne of manipulating sentiment for power. She questioned whether this was truly about honoring Diana's memory or about making a very public display to undermine the current order. There was no mistaking the implication. Camilla saw the tiara not as a gift, but as a political maneuver, calculated to elevate Catherine above her in the public eye. The accusation cut through the air like glass, and for a moment, even Catherine felt the sting. Desperate to ease the tension, Catherine tried to interject, to shift the conversation toward gratitude and unity. But in this room, intentions meant little. The more she spoke, the more she found herself drawn into the undertow of a fight that wasn't hers to begin with. Camilla's eyes turned to her, questioning whether she understood the full consequences of wearing that tiara. Anne, in turn, bristled at the implication that Catherine was naive, defending her with the same sharpness she had shown when she first placed the box in her hands. The exchange grew fiercer. Camilla accused Anne of weaponizing Diana's ghost, of dragging the late princess's memory into present-day rivalries. Anne fired back with a line that silenced the room. "This was never yours to control." The words landed with the force of a hammer, and for a moment, the silence was louder than the argument itself. The history, the grudges, the unspoken hierarchies, they all seemed to crystallize in that instant. Catherine, her heart pounding, realized there was nothing left to salvage here. She rose without a word, clutching the velvet tiara box to her chest, as though it were both shield and burden. The door closed softly behind her, but the echoes of the confrontation followed her down the corridor. She had entered that room thinking she was the recipient of a precious heirloom. She left understanding that she had also been handed a fault line that ran straight through the heart of the monarchy. But this clash was only the surface. Beneath it lay an even more dangerous truth about Diana's wishes. Locked away in an envelope yellowed with time, Diana's own words would explain why the tiara mattered so much, and why it was meant for Catherine all along. Anne had found it years ago, tucked among the late princess's personal effects, hidden in a drawer that seemed ordinary until its contents revealed otherwise. It was sealed, addressed not to a name, but to a title, the future Princess of Wales. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant yet unpretentious, as if Diana had written it in a moment of absolute clarity. Anne had known instantly that this was not something to be catalogued or handed to palace archivists. This was private. This was hers to guard. When she finally broke the seal all those years ago, the letter's contents stunned her. Diana had written with disarming honesty, stripping away the polish of royal language in favor of something far more human. She spoke not of ceremonies or formal duties, but of kindness, courage, and the relentless test of identity that came with wearing the title. She expressed a hope, not a command, that the woman who followed her would not merely endure the role, but use it as a platform to continue the causes she herself had fought for. In the middle of the page, Diana had written words that stopped Anne cold. "This tiara is a reminder of love, not obligation. It should never be worn as a shackle." The letter did not name Catherine, how could it? When Diana had no way of knowing who that future princess might be. But in her words was a tone that transcended time, a vision for the role that matched exactly what Catherine had become. For Anne, that realization grew over the years, until she could no longer ignore it. The tiara was not simply an heirloom, it was a symbol, a deliberate choice Diana had made about legacy, and Anne had vowed, silently and without ceremony, that she would keep that promise until the day came when the right person stood before her. For decades, she kept it hidden, never mentioning it to Charles, Camilla, or even William. There were countless times when she considered revealing moments of family fracture, public scandal, and shifting power, but each time, she decided the moment wasn't right. To give it too soon would cheapen its meaning. To give it to the wrong person would betray Diana entirely. Anne understood the weight of restraint, even when that restraint was a burden. When Catherine's name became synonymous with stability, empathy, and quiet resilience, Anne knew the time had come. The decision was not made on a whim. It was the culmination of years of watching, measuring, and silently judging whether Catherine truly embodied the spirit Diana had described. And in handing over the tiara, Anne was not just passing along a jewel. She was delivering Diana's voice, her wish, and her trust. The moment Catherine read the letter, the room around her seemed to fade. It wasn't just the beauty of Diana's words that struck her, it was the responsibility they carried. She now understood that wearing the tiara would mean carrying forward a legacy born of both love and struggle. A legacy that demanded more than ceremonial grace. It demanded conviction. And with Diana's own words now echoing in her heart, Catherine realized she faced a choice that could alter her role in the monarchy forever. The tiara was no longer just an heirloom. It was a burden, a weapon, and a promise. And Catherine now stood at the intersection of all three. Since the moment Anne had placed it in her hands, the question had lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. Should she wear it? To place it upon her head in public would be more than an act of tradition. It would be a statement. One the world would dissect, interpret, and weaponize in 1,000 ways. The crown that had once graced Diana's head was not a neutral ornament. It carried decades of symbolism, emotion, and controversy, each jewel a reflection of a story still unfolding. In the privacy of their home, she spoke of her doubts to William. She feared the inevitable comparisons, the headlines that would pit her against a woman who could never be replaced, the political interpretations that would ripple through the palace. William listened, his words quiet but certain. "She would be proud of you, Kate. You've earned the right to wear it, not because of your title, but because of who you are." His reassurance was meant to steady her, but it also deepened the weight of the choice before her. This was not about vanity, it was about legacy. Outside palace walls, whispers were already circulating. The press speculated relentlessly, their sources claiming to know whether and when the tiara might make its first reappearance. Fashion houses prepared sketches of how she might style it. Royal watchers debated endlessly, some declaring that Catherine's wearing of the tiara would be the ultimate tribute to Diana, others warning that it could be seen as a subtle defiance of Camilla's position. It was a strange kind of anticipation, one that blurred the line between celebration and provocation. Catherine understood the double-edged nature of the gesture. To some, it would read as unity, an unspoken bridge between the past and the present, a signal that Diana's memory still had a place within the heart of the monarchy. To others, it would appear as a bold assertion of her place in the future of the crown, potentially overshadowing those still fighting for influence. There was no way to wear it without igniting some form of reaction, but there was also no way to hide from the truth. This moment was inevitable. She made her decision quietly, without announcement or consultation beyond William and Anne. She would wear it, not to provoke and not to please, but to honor the gesture that had been made to her. Anne had taken a risk in giving her the tiara. Catherine would take a risk in placing it on her head. There was a strange symmetry to that. The night before the event, she sat alone in her room. The tiara rested on the table beside her, its diamonds catching the low light, each stone a silent witness to the storms of the past. She reached out to touch it, but stopped short, almost as if it were alive. It wasn't fear that held her back. It was reverence. Tomorrow, it would no longer be a relic, locked in memory. Tomorrow, it will breathe again. And when the day came, the world would finally see the tiara again, sparking reactions that neither Catherine nor Anne could have foreseen. Under the blinding lights of a state banquet, Catherine stepped forward, Diana's tiara shimmering above her calm yet tear-streaked face, and the palace walls shook with the weight of the message she had just sent. The room did not breathe at first. It paused, stunned into reverence, as if everyone present recognized they were witnessing a moment that would not fade with the flowers or the speeches. A hush fell, not out of etiquette but awe, followed by a murmur that built like distant thunder. Astonishment, recognition, a sudden collective memory of a princess who had once turned duty into devotion. Cameras clicked with frantic urgency, not for dress or protocol, but for proof. The jewel that had vanished into silence now burned with new meaning. The images leapt outward in seconds, screens flooding with angles, lenses chasing the arc of diamonds, as if clarity could be wrestled out of light. And then came the first comparisons, inevitable and uncontainable. Headlines didn't ask whether Catherine meant to summon Diana. They insisted she had. The public answered with emotion rather than analysis. People cried, people cheered. People who had long grown tired of palace politics felt suddenly, fiercely invested. In that swell, Catherine stopped being merely admired and became something rarer claimed. Across the top table, Camilla's composure slipped into a stillness too deliberate to be called calm. A mask that acknowledged the symbolism while refusing to concede to it. It was not a scene of triumph over a rival. It was a reckoning with a narrative that no one could fully control. Anne stood unobtrusively in the background, watchful and unreadable, and when Catherine lifted her chin, not proud, simply resolute, Anne's smallest nod answered, silent but unmistakable. The promise had been kept. Outside the hall, the city shifted tone. Commentators who had once treated Catherine's restraint as passivity now saw it as strength. Poles that had hovered steady broke sharply upward, the needle moving as if jolted by electricity. Catherine's approval surged, not because she wore diamonds, but because she wore a decision, one that carried risk, invited backlash, and still chose meaning over safety. For the institution, the implications were immediate and impossible to spin away. Some saw unity, a bridge stretched between eras, a sign that the crown could honor memory without being trapped by it. Others saw a challenge, a bright line drawn through precedence, influence, and power, the kind of gesture that changes how doorways open and who is invited to step through them first. Catherine did not gloat and did not falter. She simply held her ground, letting the roar of the world pass through her without flinching. The photographs would endure, but it was the feeling that would do the lasting work, the sense that something unresolved had finally been given direction. And in the quiet, after the last toast, with the tiara's echo still vibrating through the public imagination, everyone understood that the monarchy would not return to its previous shape. It had been redrawn by a single choice, signed in grace and steadiness, witnessed by millions. And so, in one moment of velvet, diamonds, and tears, a new chapter in the royal story began, one that Diana herself might have written. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.